Kia ora, nau mai, haere mai, and a warm welcome to this conversation on craft conversations. My name is Sarah Clearwater, and I'm here today with Jodi Meadows, one of our wonderful community hosts, to share more about craft conversations and what you can do with it inside the CX Collective community. Hi, welcome, Jodi.
Kia ora, Sarah, thank you. Yeah, craft conversations.
Craft conversations. I wonder if you could kick us off by telling us a bit about yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. So my background in terms of my design story started at university. So I trained in design, industrial design, and Pacific studies. So really interdisciplinary practice, which I guess informs a little bit about craft conversations and my why behind the event as well. Really, what inspires me as a designer is thinking through the lens of Pacific creative histories and how some of that can inform how we approach our creative practice now. And I mean, that extends out into all sorts of realms, I guess, and and that's led me on all sorts of paths. So I also have a background in the art world. So I did my design degree, I went into the art world, and I did a lot of curating and kind of public programming and education, and worked really closely with a lot of Pacific artists, and that was really inspiring. I made a chop change into my design career purely for the fact that I wanted to work more with communities, and art institutions tend to ask people to come into the institution rather than go out to them. And design for me is an opportunity to go out to community and truly meaningfully work with them and for them. I live and play in a social innovation space. So I've worked out in South Auckland, and now working for Auckland Hospital as part of Art of Manawa, which is an interdisciplinary design team. Really, really comfortable in that big social complex social innovation space. It's sort of my mahi and what really drives me as a designer.
Amazing. I think you and I have known each other for a while, and your journey has taken you in and out of the CX Collective through a variety of permutations. And now you're back and have offered this, I guess, beautiful event series around craft conversations. What is craft conversations? What are we doing there?
So craft conversations, I guess for me, started with working with Sarah again, right, as part of the CX Collective, and thinking about what am I going through as a designer that maybe others want to be part of, or maybe I want to share with others. And at the time that I was thinking about craft conversations, I was in a transition from one job to another. And I think in that transition, I became really aware of the change in context. I was also going through winter school, which is another CX event. And we were talking about the difference between craft and context. And for me, that was I was going through that transition of moving from one job to another, where I was working in a whole new context. And I'm like, oh my gosh, there is a difference between the place that you work in and how you are and how you want to be as a designer. So craft conversations really started exploring and asking that question of, well, where are the spaces that we can, as designers together collectively, start having conversations about what our craft is, what spaces might influence how we work, how that might help us understand where we're working and who we're working with, and how it might give us a different lens on our toolbox, right? In a way that is safe and welcoming to just play and experiment and do that alongside other designers that are coming from their different contexts, right? So broadly, that's an umbrella idea of the events.
I think it's really interesting how you used your own experience of transitioning between roles to identify a real need to be intentional with our craft, and also, I guess, unpacking maybe where your own gaps were. So what I'm hearing from you is that craft conversation offers other designers the opportunity to interrogate their own craft, their toolbox, their methods through different lenses.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. In ways that aren't our usual. I think that's a really important part when I'm thinking about the next place that craft conversations goes. It's how do we extend our toolboxes? How do we play with different materials or inspired by different crafts that exist around us, that maybe we don't think of as design, but could actually play a part in how we think about a particular tool in design or relationship build with a certain type of user group that we're about to engage with. It could be a doorway into a new way of working.
So help me be really explicit around why is it important that we look at our craft through different lenses?
I think the recent Auckland experience is really nice example of it. Like we're going through in the New Zealand experience, right? We're going through a lot of change, socially, environmentally, and I think as designers for businesses and for the public sector, organizations, we're at the heart of that change, right? And those organizations and those businesses are going to have to change with the different contexts that are shifting around us. Some, we know are coming, and then a lot we don't know are coming, right? So I think the role that craft conversations has to play is to open up that place where you can spend time with other designers, understanding who you are, I think, and nurturing that practice of I have a craft and I can hold it and I can reflect on it, and I can bring pieces of it into me. So when this change comes in my job, or as my role as a designer, I have another shelf of equipment that helps me to analyze how I might approach some of these things, because it's not like our current contexts that are starting to pop up are easy answers at all, right? So we're going to have to go wider with how we explore as designers if we want to start to address some of the complexity that we're being confronted with all of a sudden.
Nice. And so when we think about those different lenses, obviously you spoke about the fact that your background is also in the arts. What sort of lenses can people expect to play with? What sort of lenses are you offering them in a craft conversation event?
Yeah, so the last craft conversations that we had was at Auckland Museum, thinking about people and how we've created communities in Auckland and how different spaces were created, and we went to the museum. So it was about that invitation to explore the stories of Auckland, and think about how we sat next to place with our practice. And then this time, coming up in March, end of March, 23rd, is less about the context that we're around and more about us in our craft. So it's an invitation to come together, and we're going to go on a little walk into the park and gather up some materials. The invitation is to think about your craft and the identity of your craft and how that might show up in the natural world, and what your aspirations are as a designer. So it's like, what are your values? And then how those values are represented in places and spaces in nature that you can pick up and gather. Then we're going to regroup, and I've got some clay. I'm going to create sculptures, going very artsy, building a sculpture that represents your values as a designer, your craft as a designer, and helps you almost meditate and think through what that is for you and how that shows up. So it'll be, I don't know, I think a beautiful experience is something that you're doing for yourself, but it's not just a practice for yourself. You could do this with, you could turn this into your own workshop, with your own participants in your work going forward, and invite people to sort of create and make and think in different ways. It's a offering for a different experience of the toolbox, but an invitation to think about your values and how they show up and how you might communicate them in a different way.
I think there are a couple of different things that I'm hearing that this is actually offering. Sort of on the one hand, there is an invitation to be more explicit in our makership and to say, well, most of the things we make show up in PowerPoint presentations. And, you know, what if we were to make something with physical material that helps us, or that becomes a reflection tool for our practice and our understanding of our practice. And I guess then the other thing is to go, at work, we tend to make with people like us, or who have shared history and shared experience, and as such, a lot of our language and our stories, I guess, are already similar. And in craft conversations, bringing people from lots of different organizations together, we have the opportunity to make alongside those who might think and make really differently to ourselves.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's the beauty of the network sets, collective network, right, is that it's a gathering of designers from all sorts of different contexts. So how we see ourselves, what our values are, could be quite different. And it's a little moment to celebrate that. To create it for yourself, but see what others come up with as well, and maybe learn different perspectives or take on new things. So it should be a nice experience of both making but sharing.
Nice. I wonder if you were to look back to your own history and experience, and if there's an example you can give us of when you've used a different lens to interrogate your practice, and maybe if there was a learning that came with that.
Yeah, do it all the time. So my background, as I said, was looking at design and Pacific studies together, right? So as soon as I started to look through the frames of different disciplines, particularly through Pacific studies in that sort of anthropological lens, critical thinking lens, it really widened how I thought about myself as a designer, how I might want to design, for example, in a relational way, taking in concepts of, there's an Indigenous concept called the va, and it's about relationality and an interconnection with all things around you. And it's like, well, as a designer, what does that mean for me? Like, how does that, if I'm connected not just to my post-its but to the people, what does that do to how I facilitate, right? So for me, it's a space that I love being in, is that one foot in one camp and another foot in another, and just seeing how they have a conversation with each other, right? And what comes out of it, and what that means for me as a practitioner. Yes, ultimately, craft conversations in different ways is trying to do the same thing and create those experiences for other people, where it's yourself in your own position, and then another space in front of you where you can create and meet in the middle. And maybe take something, use it as a way to think, well, does this change how I approach welcoming people into a workshop, or does this approach change how I synthesize? To give us slightly new lenses or approaches that we hadn't thought about and we wouldn't have otherwise, right? Because it's completely out of our context of work.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing a little bit about yourself and about the, event series that you are leading for us this year. I'm really excited to see you at the next craft conversations, because I know I'll certainly be there.
Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, very exciting.